Hi, I'm David Gain, and this is a very abbreviated version of my talk, When Chimps Are Smarter Than People, just to give you a flavour of the kind of thing that I do. Let me start by sharing my screen. Here's my title slide, email address down there at the bottom, and I'm going to go straight in with a quiz. In the real live talks, I do this and do a show of hands or whatever and get people to do 3 questions. But in this case, I've only got time to do 1. And that's the question. How did deaths per year from natural disasters change in the last century? 3 choices. Has it more than doubled? Has it remained about the same? Or has it decreased to less than half? Have a little think, take a punt. Okay, I'm not going to give you the answer to that. I'm going to get this guy to do it. This is the late Hans Rosling. He was a health advisor to the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and various aid agencies. The co-founder of a wonderful educational setup called the Gapminder Foundation, and the co-author of a book called Factfulness. And he asks that same question, along with a couple of others, in a video that you can find on YouTube or on the Gapminder website called How Not to Be Ignorant About the World. And I'm going to play you a clip from that now, giving you the answer to the question I've just shown you.
I'm going to ask you 3 multiple choice questions. Use this device to answer. The first question is, how did the number of deaths per year from natural disaster, how does that change during the last century? Did it more than double? Did it remain about the same in the world as a whole, or did it decrease to less than a half? Please answer A, B, or C. I see lots of answers. This is much faster than I do it at universities. They are so slow. They keep thinking. Oh, very, very good. Now, answers. You see, death from natural disasters in the world. You can see it from this graph here, from 1900 to 2000. In 1900, there was about 500,000 people who died every year from natural disaster. Floods, earthquake, volcanic eruption, whatever, droughts. And then, how did that change? We asked, Gapminder asked the public in Sweden. This is how they answered. The Swedish public answered like this. 50% thought it had doubled, 38% said it's more or less the same, 12% said it had halved. This is the best data from the disaster researchers. And it goes up and down, and it goes to the Second World War, and after that it starts to fall, and it keeps falling, and it's down to much less than a half. The world has been much, much more capable as the decades go back to protect people from this, So only 12% of the Swedes know this. So I went to the zoo and I asked the chimps. And you see, the chimps doesn't watch the evening news. So the chimps, they just choose by random. So the Swedes answer worse than random. Now, how did you do? That's you. You were beaten by the chimps. But it was close. You were 3 times better than the Swedes, but that's not enough. You shouldn't compare yourself to Swedes, You must have higher ambitions in the world.
And that's Hans Rosling. So, why are we getting things wrong? Well, the human mind has evolved. And sometimes out there in ancient history, in the savannah or whatever, sometimes getting it wrong had advantages. So, if a caveman is confronted by a question, is that a lion hiding in the grass? He might make a snap decision and leg it, when in fact it's just a pussycat. So in a couple of minutes' time, he's going to be feeling rather silly and gasping for breath and feeling like he needs to find something to eat to build up his calorie levels again. This fella, on the other hand, has done a bit more detailed analysis and looked a bit more carefully, and he's feeling a little bit smug. But suppose that really was a lion. This guy's made the same snap decision, but on this occasion, yeah, he's actually right. The other fella, he's taken a bit more time. He's come up with the right answer as well, but not perhaps with the outcome that he wished. So sometimes a mind that gives an occasional wrong answer is an asset. Sometimes a mind that gave the right answer in the savannah gives the wrong answer in a modern society. And the psychologists call these things biases. To a psychologist, a bias is a leaning in a particular direction. It doesn't mean necessarily mean it's a bad thing. And they call them cognitive or heuristic biases, mental shortcuts that we all use that give us some wrong answers. And the psychologists have discovered loads of these and given them all kinds of names. There's selection bias, framing effect, loss aversion, Dunning-Kruger effect. That's a beauty. That's worth looking up. Confirmation bias, anchoring, availability effect. There's just loads and loads of these things. And I'll give you one example so you can see what we're talking about. If I show you selection bias, this is the way that we have of noticing something more when something causes us to be more aware of it. So, for example, this is a Mark III Ford Escort. I bought one of these back in the late 80s, early 90s. And the day before I bought it, I would have thought there weren't many on the road. The day after, they were everywhere. About the same time, I was talking to my boss at work and he told me he came from a place called Scunthorpe. I would have said I'd never heard of Scunthorpe on the news, ever. I heard it mentioned 3 times in the next fortnight. So there are these psychological biases. Who is affected by these biases? Well, we would like to think that our legal eagles, our lawyers and so on, very rational, logical people, consistent in their conclusions. But this chart here shows the outcome of parole hearings. You can see up here, at this point, the proportion of paroles being granted is nearly 3/4. And down here, it's way down. It's little more than 1/5. And going from left to right here is time of day. And this was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science in the US. And it shows that these legal eagles come up with vastly different conclusions at different times of the day. Why? Perhaps to do with sugar levels, perhaps to do with tiredness. We don't know. This lady here is a CIA intelligence analyst. These are very, very switched on people. It's very competitive, hard to get into, very highly trained. And their job is to analyze news and as it comes through and to try and figure out what's going on. But if you give these guys an exercise where there's been a chemical explosion and you first feed them information suggesting that it's a terrorist incident, they will tend to stick to that conclusion even when later evidence comes in suggesting it's actually just an accident. But if you give them the accident information first, they'll tend to lean towards that. So they're biased in favour of the early information that they're given. So if the lawyers and these switched on, highly intelligent, highly trained CIA people are affected by biases, who else is affected by biases? Me. Must be. Must be. You and I and me, we must all be affected by these things. And Rosling, shortly after his death, actually, this book was published, Factfulness, and it's the inspiration for this talk. He doesn't bother himself with psychological jargon and biases. He calls these things instincts, and he's identified 10. And this subtitle, you see the subtitle here on the book, is 10 Reasons We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. And I'm going to give you one of those today, one example. And that's what Rosling calls the fear instinct. And this is the way we have of paying more attention to things that are dramatic and less to those that aren't. So if I show you a picture of this guy and tell you he's swimming around where you're paddling, you're probably going to get out of the water pretty quickly. But in fact, these ladies kill more people every year than the sharks do. And of course, the media need drama. It sells newspapers, it gets people watching. Here's a newspaper headline. Weather forecast correctly predicts mild weather. Do you think it's a real one? A real headline? Of course it isn't. What makes a good headline? Earthquakes, wars, floods, refugees, terrorism, disease. These are the things that make a good story. So, our fear instinct makes us give added weight to reports of physical harm, knife crime, violence by people, animals, sharp objects, captivity, hostage situations, entrapment, loss of control, loss of freedom, and contamination. I've got radiation here, but of course COVID fits equally well there. So the media present it more, we notice and remember it more, and the result, the world seems scarier than it actually is. And yet there's never been more factual information out there available to us. So I'll give you an example. And the one I picked is terrorism. Scary stuff. But terrorism has actually increased. So why am I saying should we not be afraid of it? How is our fear instinct misleading us? Another little question for you. In 2016, out of every 2,000 people who died in the world, how many of those deaths were related to terrorism? Do you want to take a punt? I'll tell you the answer. 1. Or to put it another way, 1,999 were not. And then you might ask, well, if we're here in the UK, what proportion of those deaths due to terrorism occurred in wealthy countries like the UK? And this chart covers a 10-year period, and it represents the number of deaths by terrorism in countries with varying degrees of wealth. So over here, we've got the real poorest countries, level 2, a little bit better off, level 3, better off again. And we fall into the wealthy category, we're level 4. And rather distressingly, because there's a lot of people in the world, these tombstones, each tombstone represents 1,000 deaths over that 10-year period. So how many tombstones do you think we're going to see in the wealthy countries? 1. Okay, so terrorism deaths in the UK. How do the number of terrorist-related deaths compare to other causes of death? Dementia and Alzheimer's killing 69, nearly 70,000 a year. Ischemic heart disease, 55,000. Injury, poisoning, other external causes, 23,000. Road deaths, 1,800. And I took an average for terrorism deaths over a 20-year period because of course they vary a lot from year to year. And the average number of terrorism deaths per year in the UK was 8. So the world seems scarier than it actually is. The information is out there. And if you see a news report or something in the newspaper or on the telly or on social media, and you feel scared or angry or alarmed or even despondent, don't panic. Don't panic. Take a look at the facts, dig out the facts and find out what the story really is. I don't have time in this talk to cover these areas. I've had to blank these out to fit within the time scale. But I would like just to mention that subtitle on Hans's book, 10 Reasons, and I've given you one, 10 Reasons We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. This is my website. You can find information about all my talks there, and this is the book that this talk was based on. Hans and his son and daughter-in-law set up an educational thing called gapminder.org, which is terrific. You go onto that and it starts by saying, you are probably wrong about, and gives you a whole load of different topics about the state of the world. And you can click on them and do multiple choice quizzes and questions like the one I gave you today. You can even get certificates, educational certificates. On YouTube, if you look up Hans Rosling, 200 countries, 200 years, 4 minutes. That's brilliant. That's an extract from a BBC television programme. The Magic Washing Machine is fun. That's a really good one. How to End Poverty in 15 Years. And the one I showed you a clear clip from, How to Not to Be Ignorant About the World, which runs for about half an hour. And that's my website up there. And that's my email down there if you want to get in touch. Gapminder.org is where you can find the quizzes that I mentioned. And that's where I finish my talk. Hope you enjoyed it.